Israel is apparently on track for a long period of civil disobedience, internal turmoil, and political mayhem. This is a result of the law voted by the government's coalition yesterday to limit the Supreme Court and other laws and actions by the government that may follow. It goes from the streets to the military to the medical establishment and much more. I-24 News, Emmanuel Honorat reports.
Chaos erupted in Israel as the anti-judicial reform protest movement upped its game and faced police late into the night on Monday. The scenes unlike anything the rest of the world has seen coming out of Israel, as the protests inched close to their 30th week. After unsuccessfully reaching any kind of compromise, the Knesset approved the reasonableness bill, the first in the list of the judicial reforms the government wants to make.
In the coming days, the coalition will contact the opposition in order to hold a dialogue between us. We are ready to discuss everything immediately and do it in the round of talks during the recess and reach a comprehensive agreement on everything. And if necessary, we will add more time. Until the end of November, it is more than enough time to reach an agreement on everything.
The opposition boycotted the vote, a symbol of allegiance to the civilians' protest movement. Opposition parties also rejected an offer by Prime Minister Netanyahu to now engage in negotiations over the other parts of the proposed reforms. Pleading with the protesters, former Defense Minister Benny Gantz urged Army reservists to keep serving despite their objections to the reforms.
I'm a person who knows battles, and I tell you today, even if we lost the battle, in the overall campaign we will all win. We will win as one strong company, not one side or another, all of us together. We will get the state of Israel back on track. We have no mandate to despair. It is time to continue fighting for our country and our common future. We will do everything to put the wheel back and fix it. It will happen. Everything that has passed here will be canceled, and the number of laws will be deleted sooner or later.
The White House was also quick to respond.
It is unfortunate that the vote today took place with the slimmest possible majority. And we understand talks are ongoing. Let's not forget that. They're ongoing and likely to continue over the coming weeks and months to forge a broader compromise, which is what the president has been calling for these past several months, even when Knesset is in recess. So that's what we understand.
In Lebanon, the head of Iranian-backed Hezbollah terror movement, Hassan Nasrallah, seized the opportunity to gloat at what he called Israel's path to disappearance.
Israeli society, which was convinced Israel is a regional superpower, has started to deteriorate in terms of its faith, self-confidence, and belief in the entity's existence, to the point it reached the current crisis, and today especially is one of the worst days in the entity's history. As some of its family and friends say, it's on the edge of collapse, fragmentation, and destruction, God willing.
The anti-reform protests are expected to escalate.
Demonstrations have been going on almost non-stop now. I-24 News' Hamda Salchut is live in Jerusalem ahead of another evening. Hamda.
Jacob, good evening. Great to be with you. While it is calm in Jerusalem now, that certainly wasn't the case yesterday. Demonstrators coming in from all over the country to Jerusalem, blocking roads, even blocking one of the major highways that connects Jerusalem to a lot of other major cities, Begin Road, as soon as that verdict was announced by the Israeli government that they voted to pass the reasonableness bill, the first of many in the judicial overhaul. Demonstrators flocked from all parts of the city and made their way onto that highway. Now, police were trying to use riot dispersal methods to try and get the protesters out of the way. Yesterday, we saw quite the use of force by Israeli police against demonstrators, saying that they were going to use every sort of mechanism at their disposal to try and curb these protests, and we can expect to see more of that in the days and weeks to come. Jacob.
Thank you very much, Hamda, in Jerusalem, live. With me now here in the studio is Dr. Shani Moore, an expert on Israeli democracy. Thank you very much and for coming, and good evening.
Thank you.
The anti-Supreme Court legislation is going to the Supreme Court.
Right.
What is going to happen?
In this specific case, probably nothing. I'm very skeptical that the Supreme Court will want to touch this, and I'm very skeptical that they'll have a legal ground for it. It's a very, very, very narrowly worded law. It's not only that, it's a basic law. The Supreme Court, most of its authority for the so-called constitutional revolution in striking down legislation, not in interfering with government decisions, but in striking down legislation, derives from their ostensible contradiction with basic laws. The Supreme Court in previous decisions has left itself an opening to strike down even basic laws in the extreme case where they violate Israel's fundamental constitution as a Jewish and democratic state. That's never happened. They've left themselves an opening to use that power at some future date. I don't see the text in this legislation, however bad it is, however objectionable it is to most of the Supreme Court and most of the legal establishment. I'd be surprised if it came to this on this particular specific piece of legislation.
On this specific one, but there's more.
Oh, there's much more.
There's a lot more. All right, so are we facing a constitutional crisis down the line?
In several senses we are, and we're facing a very deep political crisis. First, the constitutional crisis that you're suggesting. If we get to a situation where further pieces of legislation from this so-called judicial reform initiative do get challenged at the Supreme Court, many of them can be overturned in Supreme Court decisions. That would be very risky, it would have a very high price, but it's easy to imagine that happening. For example, if anything like the override law passes. There's a few other bits of the Levine program that I think would be very easy to challenge in the Supreme Court, even if they do pass as parts of basic legislation, because of this hole that the Supreme Court left for itself. In such a situation where a basic law has been passed, it's such a central part of government policy, the Supreme Court's overturned it, it is possible to imagine a situation where the government says, we'll let the Supreme Court enforce its own order, as President Jackson said.
So what happens
That would
then?
be a veritable constitutional crisis, an actual constitutional crisis. But in a less formal sense, I think we're already in a constitutional crisis, even without the branches of government in direct combat. We're in a complete constitutional crisis about what the definition of a Jewish and democratic state is, because this initiative brings to the fore a confluence of three anti-constitutional forces in Israeli politics, but they're quite uneven with each other. There's a meeting point of interest here between what we might call organized crime, a few corrupt politicians, including some very senior ones who want to escape from their own legal troubles. The standard coalitional bargaining of the Haredi parties, and the third element, which is the interests of the West Bank settler movement. There's an enormous difference between what the first two legs of that triangle bring and what the third two. The first two are strictly opportunistic. Their assault on Israel's democratic institutions is not essential. It's taking advantage of the situation. The third one is completely different. The settler movement is assaulting Israeli constitutional democracy because it has to in order to survive, because it itself constitutes an entire redefinition of what a Jewish state is and what a democratic state is. Its brilliance has been leveraging the interests of those other two parties to get for itself a parliamentary majority in circumstances where it otherwise couldn't.
Different parts, but same interest eventually. We have under a minute. What about the conflict of interests of the Prime Minister himself?
So we have a very unique situation where he has actually signed a document that doesn't allow him, as part of his trial, because as he's both a member of parliament and a member of the government, he's also a defendant in a criminal trial.
And the Supreme Court is going to rule on that.
And the Supreme Court is going to rule on that because he has basically violated the agreement he signed with the court, but the Knesset passed a law, which is now being challenged in court, essentially exempting him from the agreement he himself signed.
Are you confused? Everybody is. Dr. Shani Moore, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming.